consciousness that I'm about to get to. And the ego perceives anything that it doesn't know through experience as dangerous and a death. So anything new to the ego is going to be perceived as a risk of death, and it's going to fight back really hard. So when you bring in the idea of wanting to seek out things that cause you to evolve, the ego is going to push you toward doubt and questioning yourself and not wanting to go further. But yeah, so we've talked about it enough. So I read Power versus Force by David Hawkins. And the book, so he was I think he's a psychologist, some sort of medical doctor, or some sort of doctor. He had, and the timeline is off, so like when you read the book, you can find it for yourself. He had an enlightenment experience, and I don't know if at that point he, like, once he came back to, he decided he was blissed out for a long time. He just did nothing for months or years, and then decided he was going to reinsert himself into society and serve. And just like, I've watched a lot of his lectures, I've read a lot of his books, and it's like there's such an energy and presence to his words. It's so powerful, and it just resonates as such an important truth to me that is, listening to the books or reading the books, just being around that energy in itself, it will change you. It puts you in a really, really good place. And then on top of that, the information in the book is amazing. So at some point, and I'm not sure if he was researching consciousness before he became enlightened or if it was all after. That's what I mean. I don't know the timeline. Not important. He went deep into studying consciousness and the evolution of consciousness, and he put together this map of consciousness. So it's like a scale, in the same way that when light hits a prism, it refracts into like the rainbow, and it's multiple different levels of light that are all different frequencies. He basically studied consciousness in the same way, and is using a form of applied kinesiology, muscle testing, to determine what was true and what was not true, and did it with lots of different subjects over many years,
like thousands and thousands and thousands.
Yeah, there's very, very like intense, peer-reviewed, repeated studies where they basically put together this scale of different levels of consciousness, beginning at shame as like the lowest level for a human, working up to enlightenment at the highest level. And it's a scale from 20 to 1,000, but it's a logarithmic scale. And this will make sense, I think, in a little bit. But they're measuring, because they're measuring on multiple different things at each level. And the scale, or the numbers that we're going to refer to, is a measure of the energy associated with that level of consciousness. So I was saying before that as organisms evolve into higher consciousness organisms, they have the capacity to handle more life force energy. Same goes for people. So when you have a person whose level of consciousness is at the level of shame, and we can all kind of picture or understand like what somebody who's in immense shame feels like. That person has very, very low drive, very low ambition, very low energy. They can't even get out of bed. It's like severe depression, where you can't even get yourself out of bed to go do something. That's really, really low energy. Where you have stuff higher up on the scale, like love and joy and like enlightenment, like that's like huge levels of life force energy, where you're like really, really driven to do things. You're ambitious, you're excited, you're active. You can just go and go and go for days, and you don't even realize you're tired because you're like in love with what you're doing.
Yeah.
That's how the energy of the scale works.
Yeah. I just want to say that enlightenment is, I believe, what we're striving for in this life.
Mm-hmm.
very few people. So it's Buddha, Krishna,
Yeah.
Jesus, like
Yeah.
they were enlightened.
Yeah. It's like the ascended masters. It's the
Yes.
people who are, it's like,
And
yeah.
we're working towards that.
But also the way that the scale works, it's logarithmic. So that's like, so I started to say this before. So like shame is at a level 20. The next one up is guilt at level 30. It's not just 10. It's not a degree of 10. It's like logarithmically 10. So I'm not that great at math, but I think that means like 10 to the 20th versus 10 to the 30th, then 10 to the 40th. So like each one is like 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10, 30 times, then 10 times 10 times 40 times. So it's like these numbers are like astronomically larger, but it all plays into essentially an average of humans. So you have somebody like Buddha, and then somebody like Jesus, like these individuals come like one at a time, and their level of consciousness is so high that it lifts everybody that they come into contact with, and it lifts the entire planet to a higher level, which is important because first off, we need that. So especially like 2000 years ago, we were at such a low point in our consciousness of evolution on the planet, where you have somebody like Jesus come, bring so much energy that it literally lifts people to like have the drive to evolve. And that's, you know, where we've been. And it's been like this slow progression of lifting like every few years. We stayed at the same for a very, very long time. And now we're just getting up just over 200, like a 207 or something like that. But also that same concept works with each of us.
Mm-hmm.
So as I lift my consciousness, I affect everybody else who I engage with or have any sort of relationship with.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because I truly believe, and we talked about this before the podcast, that that's how I became aware. I've said this on multiple podcasts. I tell everybody that you've always been a step ahead, if not 10 steps ahead of me on this journey. And never once did you try to change me or convince my mind in any ways. You were always planting seeds. Oh, I listened to this great book if you want to listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
I listened to this, or I'm changing this. Like, but all you were doing was leading by example and emanating this newer energy that is consciousness. Everything is energy. Consciousness is energy. So as you changed yours, I'm in your field. We
Mm-hmm.
lived together for so long. And I think that that really helped me and catapulted me into a newer level and a better understanding, especially when we listened to this book
Mm-hmm.
about 4 years ago. And I will say, I do believe a huge part of this was when we first moved to San Francisco 10 years ago. We had to almost leave the environment, the programs and the conditioning that had made us who we are, to almost start over and create our own way, our own path. And it led us, you and me, but to think differently, to learn differently, to be differently. This is what we're talking about. Be gentle with yourself when you're unlearning everything you've been taught and told to be. And yeah, it's just, it's so incredible. And I thank you for that.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's a sweet thing to say. I want to read through these, just maybe it'll make more sense, and just the different levels, so that we can talk about what that does mean.
But wait, before we start doing this, you were talking about power versus force. I just want to like make sure you touch upon.
I want to.
You're gonna.
I want to come. I want to come back. I just want.
Okay.
I want to read all these first.
Okay.
So that there's some sort of sense to what I'm trying to say. So it's set up in these levels, and the scale is from the book Power versus Force, and it's also referenced in a lot of other David Hawkins books. But it's like at the lowest level is shame, and there's also there's a life view and a view of God, and there's sort of emotions in the process that are that equate with these. I want to get into those in different episodes, because I don't. It will take way too long. So maybe I'll just, like, for the first one, I'll explain just so it makes sense. But you have shame, where when you're at the level of shame and you're at the level 200 for energy, You view the world as being miserable, and you view God as being despising, and it's equated with the emotion of humiliation and the process of elimination. As you start to work up, the energy goes up, the emotions seem a little happier, but you work up through guilt, then to apathy, then to grief, then up to fear, then to desire, then anger, then pride, courage, neutrality, willingness, acceptance, reason, love, joy, peace, and enlightenment. So with each one of those, like the energy goes up, the emotions are a little better. And like I said, we'll go into that in later episodes. But the way that I see this and the way that Dr. Hawkins explains it, these all exist all the time. These levels of consciousness are all different frequencies that exist simultaneously in the world. And we kind of attach to different levels depending on what our current level of frequency is. So these are all exist in the same way that, like, when you have a radio, all the radio stations are playing in your room at once. And depending on where you tune the dial to, you attract to a different station. And that comes in clear, and you don't notice all the other ones. This is the same way you could have a group of people experience something and all get something different out of it, all perceive it completely different. Some people are excited about it, some people are like upset about it, some people are like really angry. It's because there's the experience of what's happening, and then there's everybody's perception of it. And everybody's perception of it is tied to their level of consciousness.